Hello again, everyone, and thank you once again for joining us for this Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. First weather graphic, again, breakup map now for the 17th of May, 2020, and the flooded watch or flood advisory has ended for Romanik and Alekanik. That was out, ended at 1 p.m. Sunday afternoon. So that's pretty much over now, breakup-wise, along the Yukon River. Then up to the north, no watches, warnings, or advisories out for the Kobuk and Noatak rivers. You can see some open along the Kobuk River, and the Noatak River has some pretty good stretches of mostly open, and still mostly ISO right at the mouth of the Noatak River. And then the three North Slope rivers there, still mostly ice due to the temperatures remaining in the 20s or colder throughout the day and overnight hours. And the Colville, Sagwan, and the other one up there will probably remain mostly ice for at least probably the upcoming week. Moving on to the hazardous weather graphics, there are no watches, warnings, or advisories weather-wise around the state for tonight and tomorrow, even out west. So I'll just move on to the fire danger chart. And this is fire danger for, yesterday I showed the one for grass, which was extreme. The entire yellow area here you can see was extreme for that. Today I'm showing the fire danger for spruce, and very high for the areas on the north and west of the Alaska Range, all the way around into northeast Bristol Bay there and Kuskokwim Valley, especially near and southwest of Fairbanks. Actually a small area of extreme for spruce. Very high fire danger, Susitna, Mananuska Valley, as well as the central Copper River Basin, and portions of the Kenai Peninsula in the high zone, and high fire danger extending into the Seward Peninsula and Noatak Valley, and mostly elevated fire danger wherever the winds are blowing, obviously, because it's mostly dry conditions through the interior. So moving on to satellite imagery, you can see a distinct lack of cloudiness in interior Alaska, especially north and west of the Alaska Range up to the Brooks Range, with mostly sunny skies. In spite of that, temperatures remained on the cool side at early afternoon, upper 30s to upper 40s, some areas pushing the lower 50s. Milder over the Kenai Peninsula, Susitna Valley, 66 at Wasilla this afternoon, as well as around Kenai Lake area. And even warmer, southern Panhandle, some areas pushing in the lower 70s. Up north, some sun and variable clouds. Haines Hoona, right around 70 degrees. Out west, weakening frontal system, or rather weak frontal system, especially precip and wind-wise. Actually more of a wind producer and precipitation producer, but those winds not particularly strong. Anywhere southeast 25 gusts 40 miles an hour from the Fox Islands to the western Alaska Peninsula there around the Cold Bay area, while even the Pribilof seeing 30 to 35 mile an hour wind gusts today, with Atka the exception, peak wind gusts there near 45 miles an hour in closer to the low center. But precipitation amounts pretty light, 3/100 of an inch at Dutch Harbor, and that was about one of the heavier amounts in the last 12-hour ending at mid-afternoon. Otherwise, low clouds, fog up along areas of the Arctic coast, and that persisting, tending to improve during the afternoon hours. East winds gusting 30 miles an hour. Point Lay made for VFR conditions there, all along the northwest coast. But flurries and fog, St. Lawrence Island, continued into the afternoon, and we had a band of showers extending from the Copper River Basin westward out to the southwest coast. And again, precipitation amounts quite light there. More clouds over the Copper River Basin into the northern Susitna Valley, and a little more sunshine over the southwest interior. Kodiak, partly mostly sunny today. Same for the Panhandle, and that front spring rain, areas of light rain, fog, and drizzle in toward the Alaska Peninsula with the gusty winds. And that front will hold together pretty well tonight, spread a chance of rain into southwest Kodiak Island, all of the Alaska Peninsula, trying to push in toward the southwest coast with the main low center hanging back over the southern Bering Sea. Far enough north, that'll kick the winds up, or begin to increase the winds out of the west and southwest for Adak and Atka, but lighter winds back to the west with more low clouds, fog, rain, and drizzle to shimmy in at too. Stays rather breezy western Arctic coastal areas, but mostly clear over the interior, just some variable clouds. Whatever shower activity lingers ends across southern Alaska later this evening, and should be fair conditions over the Panhandle, clouds and fog, possibly pushing on along the coast, but not too far inland over the inside waters. No change from the north slope. Low clouds, fog, maybe a few flurries, and that's about it. Forecast for tomorrow, front pushes eastward, and southeast flow ahead of that shoves a fair amount of moisture up, good enough for the occasional light rain along all of the North Gulf Coast, southern Kenai Peninsula, spreading into Prince William Sound, mostly cloudy. Cook Inlet, chance of rain southern Cook Inlet along the main frontal boundary there into Kamishak Bay. Also along the western slopes of the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range. Kuskokwim Delta, cloudy, periods of rain, same for the Alaska Peninsula, and showery with a weak remnant low there, weakening low over the Aleutians. Next front, trying to push rain up toward the central Aleutian areas. Otherwise, low clouds, fog persist on the eastern Arctic coast, partly to mostly sunny once again. Day much like today for the Panhandle, and breezy, higher terrain, central northern interior, maybe a little gusty through the passes of the Brooks Range out of the northeast and the western Arctic coast. Moving on to Tuesday. Stronger system showing up now over the Aleutians there, 973 millibar low just south of Shimian at 2. And the front could have a narrow band of gale force winds ahead of that, pushing into the central Aleutians, probably a little bit heavier precipitation than what we've seen lately. A trough, low clouds, fog, and drizzle for the Alaska Peninsula. Showers continuing with partly to mostly cloudy skies, maybe a few sun breaks, but looks pretty unsettled over southern Alaska, especially the North Gulf Coast and Panhandle. Series of surges of moisture with those troughs moving onshore from the southwest. Northern interior stays partly to mostly sunny with low clouds and fog. Eastern North Slope, central eastern Arctic coast. Lows for tonight up that way, again 15 to lower 20s there, with upper 20s through the Brooks Range and actually into the Kobuk, Koyukuk, upper Yukon Valley. Look for lows in the upper 20s, down to 20 for Eagle tonight, 29 Northway, near freezing for the greater Fairbanks area, and then 40s, southern Alaska, Panhandle, the Aleutians. Highs for tomorrow, 50 to mid-60s, warmest in the west central interior, near 60 for the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, 55 to 65, south central Alaska, warmest is Sitna Valley, and 50s to lower 60s for the Panhandle, followed by lows in the upper 40s down that way. Lows teens to near 20 for the North Slope and Arctic coast, 30s and 40s. Central Alaska, mostly in the 40s, southern Alaska, and highs the following afternoon. A little cooler, 55 to 60 for south central Alaska.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
All right, first line weather graphic for Monday morning. VFR in the interior, we've got marginal VFR increasing over Prince William Sound and the eastern North Gulf Coast. Otherwise, the Panhandle, VFR, IFR out over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, and from southwest Kodiak or southern Kodiak Island along the south coast of the Alaska Peninsula. Marginal VFR from the crest of the Brooks Range northward with IFR either side of the Arctic coast. And for the afternoon, now we have IFR in the central Arctic coast, marginal VFR for the North Slope, and from about Point Ley to Kivlina, northwest coast and interior, all VFR southward to the Kuskokwim Delta, and then north of the Alaska Range, VFR, Copper River Basin VFR, Mendiska Valley VFR, increasing marginal VFR, eastern slopes of the Western Alaska Range, as well as the western Susitna Valley, western Cook Inlet, IFR spreading into Kamishak Bay and Augustine Island. All of Kodiak now IFR. IFR up into western Prince William Sound, east side of the Kenai Peninsula, and marginal and IFR over the Bering Sea and Aleutians. And for the Tuesday morning outlook, we've got IFR now making its way to the northern coast of the Panhandle with increasing marginal VFR elsewhere, and IFR across the Gulf, Prince William Sound, and the east side of the Kenai Peninsula. IFR now possible along the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range. Otherwise, VFR Cook Inlet, Matanuska, Susitna Valley, Copper River Basin, good portion of the interior, some IFR central North Slope and Arctic coast. IFR southwest Bering, western Aleutians, otherwise marginal VFR over the central southern Bering Sea. Northern Bering, though, looking pretty good VFR, including St. Matthew Island right through the Bering Strait to the Chukchi Sea. Then for Tuesday afternoon, marginal VFR, Arctic coast North Slope, and Brooks Range VFR southward. Southwest interior marginal VFR, especially the Kuskokwim Valley, southern Cook Inlet, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, Gulf of Alaska, Panhandle, IFR along the southwest coast and around Nunivak Island. And the next system pushing a pretty good area, IFR, eastward in across the southern Bering Sea and to the central Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, marginal. Passes IFR, especially early on, northern entrance Anatuvik and Atigan, otherwise VFR for both those passes. Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR becoming marginal. And windy, VFR trending toward marginal, especially on the eastern entrance of all three of those passes into the afternoon. And windy, VFR. Isabel holding VFR, as well as Mentasta. And, of course, Tanita will be VFR, be an increase in the clouds, but they'll be of the VFR variety. And for Portage, marginal becoming marginal becoming IFR. And Chilkoot and White, another VFR day, at least through Monday, probably dropping to marginal on Tuesday. Freezing levels, 2,000 feet up to Point Hope, cutting down across to now south of Eagle, 6,000 feet southern Alaska, 8,000 feet to Kodiak Island. Icing, could be some areas of considerable moderate terrain enhanced along the Aleutian Range, spilling into northeast Bristol Bay, maybe Fognak Island. Otherwise, isolated moderate rime icing spreading northward across the Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet, Bristol Bay, and then areas of scattered out west over the eastern Aleutians. And for the jet stream, still have that curvature, anticyclonic curvature there just north of the eastern Arctic coast. So 40 to 50 knot winds coming around that. And otherwise westerlies over a ridge of high pressure from the Gulf, about 30 knots through the interior, and then about 100 knots south of the Aleutians. And from there, taking a look at 9,000 feet, low pressure north of the Aleutians there, Vadak and Atka, 40 knot winds across those islands, 35 knots out of the east on the north side of the center over the northern Bering Sea, but pretty light over interior Alaska, the Gulf, and the Panhandle. And at 3,000 feet, again, same pattern, 45 knot westerlies over the central Aleutians, northeast, 35 to 40 there, St. Lawrence Island, into the northern Bering Sea, lighter, trending northeast over the interior, variable southern Alaska, and the Panhandle pretty light. Below 4,000 feet, look for turbulence. Light to ice, lane water, chop, northern interior. Also, all over the eastern Aleutians to Adak.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and today I'm privileged to introduce Dr. Uccellini, the Director of the United States National Weather Service. Welcome back to Alaska, sir.
Thank you, Dave. Glad to be here.
Thanks. Prior to being the leader of the National Weather Service, your work included an extensive look at snowstorms across the northeastern United States. These are the types of storms that can bring some of the country's largest cities to its knees. Tell me a little bit about your fascination with snow.
Well, as far back as I can remember, I've always been interested in weather, growing up as a kid on Long Island, New York, and was particularly fascinated by snowstorms. Why they occurred, the distribution of snow was very varied across the entire region, the rain-snow line, all those things fascinated me right from the get-go. And I was interested in knowing how they worked, how the forecast worked, or more often than not didn't work one way or the other. And that drove me, that interest continued to build and drove me through high school right into college, wanting to be a meteorologist.
Okay, that's a fascinating story, and I think every meteorologist has a weather story like that in some way.
Right.
Due to Alaska's size and proximity to the North Pole, sometimes it's difficult to detect and analyze the weather patterns over Alaska. What's the National Weather Service doing to improve that weather detection?
Well, observations in this type of environment is a big challenge, whether it's from space or from what we call in situ observations from the ground or within the systems. Clearly, satellites have been playing an increasing role in providing the big picture, not only from a visual sense and what you see is occurring, but also from providing the data for numerical models that then are used to actually predict the weather. Alaska is actually pretty well positioned with respect to polar orbiting satellites, since you get a faster return of those satellites over your particular area. And in fact, the polar satellite system is the backbone for the observations that we use in our models, especially our global models, and they're particularly important for observing weather features that affect Alaska.
Alaskans live and die by the weather every day, and one of the strategic goals of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Weather Service is to develop a more weather-ready nation. What does it mean for Alaskans to be weather-ready?
Well, the strategic outcome is based on people being ready, responsive, and therefore resilient to the increasing threats to extreme weather events. Those threats are related to not only the nature of the events, but the fact that we're becoming more vulnerable to them as we have more people, more infrastructure that could be affected by these events. So we have to ensure that the observations we make for situational awareness, the forecasts we make for people to take the proper responses are connected to people's actions, the response to these events, so that they will be more resilient to what's facing them. You know, there are examples with respect to hurricanes. More people living along the coastline takes longer to evacuate. We have to make better forecasts with longer lead times, but we also have to communicate the threat so people will actually take action to avoid those storms. Up here you have, as in other parts of the United States, an increasing threat related to fire. As there are more people living in fire-prone areas, we have to ensure that our forecasts are good, that we don't have false alarms that make people not react to the forecast when in fact they should. But we also have to be able to communicate the threat and make sure that we're working with the partners in the emergency management community so that communities and right down to individuals will actually take the proper responses in the face of these events. So that's the strategic goal. There are a lot of challenges for us in terms of improving forecasts, but also improving our communication skills and linking with the emergency management communities that are actually out there trying to protect lives and mitigate property loss.
So a huge partnership effort going forward.
That's one of the important keys for the success of meeting the strategic goal.
Okay. One of the things you're talking about was understanding the weather information we're getting back from the computers, weather modeling, and you did a lot of work with that in some of your prior positions with the Environmental Prediction Center there, the National Center for Environmental Prediction. What can you tell us about recent improvements in that weather modeling? And you were using the polar orbiters as kind of a source of information that started that process.
Well, you know, first of all, we have to recognize that everything you see, you read and hear about weather, climate, or ocean forecasts are all driven by numerical models. Now, it really has been the revolution in our forecast process in the last part of the 20th century. The success of that numerical enterprise is based on three factors: big computers, global data, not just local data, but you have to have a global data set, and then the models themselves, the science that's behind the models and in running the models in an operational mode. So we're working to improve all three of those components. We upgraded our computers last year. We're going through another upgrade even as I speak. We'll be upgrading from 200 trillion calculations per second to 700 trillion calculations per second by January of 2015. This increase in the computer will allow us to run what we call Earth system models. It's not just the atmosphere, it's the atmosphere, ocean, ice, which is obviously very important up here, and land models that are all coupled together at higher resolution. So you need the big computers, you need the science that allows us to run these models and run them in a parallel mode, and that they're coupled so that the ocean effects could affect the atmosphere and vice versa, as an example. And then the global observations are absolutely critical, and over the last 20, 30 years they've become more dependent upon the satellite systems, and especially the polar orbiting satellites, which help drive the observations needed for those models, whether they be atmospheric observations, land, ice observations. We're deriving more and more of that from satellites now that feed into these models and produce forecasts with extended lead times. Now out, for extreme events especially, we're seeing much improved forecast out in the 4, 5, 6, 7, and even 8-day range, which gets us back to Weather Ready Nation, because if you're going to get ready for a storm event, you want those consistent forecasts approaching that event from day 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, so you can take the actions several days in advance that can help mitigate the property loss and protect your livelihood.
Okay, all part of the mission of protecting life and property. Dr. Uccellini, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and speaking to Alaskans and sharing how the National Weather Service is working for Alaska and the nation. Wish you safe travels around the 49th. Enjoy your time here, sir. And for Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Today's sea ice analysis. Virtually gone around Nunivak Island, except for the northeast corner there a little bit, and Yukon Delta coast, nearly gone as well. And so some heavier ice south of St. Lawrence Island, and also to the north and east of that zone holding fast there in western Norton Sound. Moving on to the coastal water forecast. A little brisk on the south coast of the Panhandle tomorrow, northwest 25 knots. That's high enough for small craft advisory, 6 to 7 foot seas. Much lighter, though, for the north coast, variable at 10. 5 to 6 foot seas, and northwest breezes 10 to 15 knots for the central and southern inside waters, including Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait. Lynn Canal in the afternoon, winds should be southerly at 20 knots with 4 foot seas. And for Tuesday, Lynn Canal, no change. Afternoon winds south 20 knots with seas at 4 feet. South to southwest winds for the inside waters, central and southern areas, Clarence Strait, Stevens Passage, at about 10 knots with 2 to 3 foot seas. And light winds along the coast, west-southwest 15 on the south coast and west 15 on the north coast, but extreme north coast up there toward Yakutat, southeast at 20 with 5 foot seas. Cook Inlet, easterlies tomorrow, 10 knots, seas 2 feet. Small craft advisors at Kamishak Bay, winds out of the east at 25 knots. East winds 25 for the Barren Islands with 8 foot seas, and for the western North Gulf Coast, look for east winds at 20 knots with 5 foot seas. Southeast 15 for Middleton Island, marine zones around Middleton Island, eastern North Gulf Coast with 5 foot seas. Light winds for Prince William Sound, variable to east, only at 10 knots. Northeast 15, though, in the forecast for Prince William Sound on Tuesday. Seas about 3 feet. Southeast 20 knots for the eastern North Gulf Coast. And the west side there, north at 15, 6 foot seas. Light winds now, lighter winds for the Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay. Westerlies at 15. Cook Inlet, south to southwest, 10 knots, seas 2 feet. Kodiak Island on the east side, southeast winds at 20 knots. Chillicothe Strait, northeast at 20, 5 foot seas. And for Bristol Bay, east winds 20 knots, south to southwest at 20 for the Alaska Peninsula, all the way up to Sitkinak. And for Tuesday, small craft advisories there for the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, southwest 25 knots, seas 13 feet. Also small craft advisories there, east side of Kodiak Island For westerlies at 25 knots, 15 knots out of the southwest for Chillicothe Strait and Bristol Bay. And for the Fox Islands, small craft advisories tomorrow. Southwest winds 25 to 30 knots, seas 6 to 15 feet. Same forecast for the Central Aleutians. Southwest 25 to 30 knots, seas 7 to 16 feet. And 25-knot winds extend possibly as far west as Kisk, although by the time you get out there, it'll probably be down to 20 knots or less, and then becoming east for Shimmy and Attu at 15 with 9-foot seas. Small craft advisories, northeast 30 knots for the western Aleutians on Tuesday, and southeast 30 knots for the central Aleutians, turning south to southeast at 30 knots for the Fox Islands, seas running 9 to 16 feet. Southwest coast, east-northeast 15 to 20 knots tomorrow for Monday, east 20 knots for the Pribilof. Small craft advisory, St. Matthew Island, northeast 25. Even stronger winds for St. Lawrence Island, northeast at 30. And then Tuesday, north 25, St. Lawrence Island. And Yukon Delta coast, northeast of 15. South 15, Kuskokwim Delta coast, kind of a convergence zone there, north of the Pribilofs and south of St. Matthew Island, where the southerlies meet the northerlies. And for the Beaufort Sea coast, east side, northeast 15, central coast, east 15, 20 knots, especially from Point Lay to Cape Beaufort, and then 25-knot winds for small craft advisories, Cape Beaufort to Cape Thompson. And the next day, no change, 25-knot winds, Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort out of the northeast, east 20 now for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. For tonight, look for some fog, flurries, and low clouds from the North Slope and Arctic coast. Fair over the interior with a fair amount clearing in the central interior with chilly temperatures dropping to near freezing, say in the Tanana Valley, to 20 near Eagle. And no change for the Panhandle. Front spreads moisture in toward Kodiak and the Alaska Peninsula tonight. Tomorrow, better chance of rain for the North Gulf Coast, Kamishak Bay, Southern Cook Inlet area. Showers over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. And unsettled and showery, especially the North Gulf Coast and Panhandle on Tuesday. That's all I've got time for tonight. Thanks again for joining us, and I'll see you again tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.